Stop blaming yourself for what you couldn't change. Sometimes God closes doors not to punish you, but to protect you. What if the thing you're crying over was never meant to stay? What if your greatest disappointment is actually God's redirection? It's time to surrender what broke you so He can restore what's meant for you. Let go and let God rewrite your story. Self-blame is one of the most subtle and destructive forms of bondage. It is the quiet voice that whispers, "You should have done better." It keeps many people living in regret, repeating cycles of guilt that were never meant to define them. The tragedy of self-blame is that it disguises itself as responsibility, when in truth it is the opposite. Responsibility says, "I acknowledge what happened and I will grow from it." Self-blame says, "It's all my fault and I'll never recover from it." One leads to transformation, the other leads to torment. The difference between the two is rooted in understanding. When you do not understand what was within your power to change and what was beyond your control, you burden yourself with false guilt. The human heart often tries to fix the past by reliving it, but healing never happens that way. God did not design the mind to dwell endlessly on regret. Reflection is good, but repetition of guilt destroys. Every time you replay a moment you can no longer change, you rob yourself of peace in the present. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can redeem it by learning its lesson. The past is not meant to be relived. It is meant to be reviewed for revelation. Self-blame focuses on what went wrong. Wisdom focuses on what can be learned. Many people assume that if they had made different choices, life would have turned out differently. Sometimes that's true, but often, God allows certain things to happen for reasons beyond your comprehension. There are moments when your best effort still falls short because God was teaching you dependence, not perfection. You are not meant to be flawless, you are meant to be faithful. Even your mistakes are ingredients in divine instruction. You cannot see it now, but some of the situations that broke you were actually shaping your discernment. When you carry guilt for what you could not change, you begin to live beneath your identity. You start viewing yourself through the lens of failure instead of faith. You tell yourself, "If only I had done this differently." But what if the very thing you're regretting was never yours to fix? What if God was redirecting something that you tried to control? Self-blame often stems from pride disguised as pain. You think you should have had the power to make everything right. But the truth is, you were never meant to play God in your own story. There are some storms you were meant to endure, not end. When you understand, the healing begins. Healing starts when you acknowledge that you are human, limited, and still deeply loved. You must allow grace to fill the spaces guilt once occupied. Grace does not erase responsibility, it restores balance. It reminds you that your role is obedience, not omnipotence. You cannot fix every person, every relationship, or every outcome. Your duty is to respond rightly, not to control the results. There is a kind of peace that only comes when you stop asking why and start trusting who. Some people believe that by blaming themselves, they are being humble or accountable. But humility is not self-condemnation. It is self-awareness guided by truth. The truth that you made decisions with the knowledge you had at the time. You walked according to your understanding. As you grow, you learn better. But that does not mean you are evil or foolish before. It means you are evolving. God is not disappointed by your humanity. He expects you to learn, not to live in shame. When you hold on to blame, you block your capacity to receive forgiveness. It's not that God hasn't forgiven you. It's that you haven't forgiven yourself. You cannot walk in divine purpose while dragging chains of regret. Release is the evidence of trust. When you stop blaming yourself, you tell heaven, "I believe your grace is greater than my mistakes." And that belief opens the door to freedom. If you truly want to move forward, you must begin by separating what was your responsibility from what was God's plan. You are responsible for your choices, not for the choices of others. You are responsible for your attitude, not for every outcome. Once you identify that boundary, you begin to regain your peace. Every moment of your life has purpose, even the painful ones. Sometimes God allows failure to refine your focus. Sometimes He closes doors to redirect your destiny. Stop treating your past as a prison. Treat it as a classroom. Every experience, good or bad, carries a lesson that builds you for what's ahead. The key is to extract wisdom, not self-punishment, Blaming yourself only keeps you emotionally stuck in what God is trying to move you past. The sooner you release it, the sooner you can walk in restoration. The past is a teacher, not a master. Learn from it, but don't let it rule you. God's mercy is new every morning because He intends you to rise, not remain in regret. Your mistakes do not define your destiny, they develop it. Stop blaming yourself for what you couldn't change and start trusting the one who can transform everything you surrender. Surrender is one of the most misunderstood principles in spiritual growth. Many people think surrender means weakness, giving up, or losing control. But in truth, surrender is not about defeat. It is about divine partnership. It is the moment you stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. It is the conscious decision to let God take the lead in places where your strength, your understanding, and your willpower have reached their limits. To surrender is not to quit, it is to realign. It is the transition from self-reliance to God-dependence. Human nature is wired to strive. From an early age, we are taught to fix, to control, to plan every detail. We believe that success comes from effort, not trust. But spiritual maturity teaches the opposite. There comes a point when your greatest act of wisdom is not in trying harder, but in releasing more. You cannot receive divine help until you stop insisting on human control. Surrender does not mean you stop acting. It means you stop acting alone. It is saying, God, I've done what I can. Now do what only you can. When you surrender, you acknowledge that your perspective is limited. You recognize that there are forces, purposes, and outcomes beyond your comprehension. The human mind is like a single window in a vast building. It can see only one side of the story. God sees the entire structure. While you see loss, He sees preparation. While you see delay, He sees development. While you see rejection, He sees redirection. But you can only access that understanding when you lay down your pride and invite divine wisdom to guide your steps. Surrender transforms chaos into clarity. The more you struggle to control everything, the more tangled life becomes. You try to fix people, rewrite past mistakes, and predict the future. And in doing so, you drain your peace. But when you finally say, Lord, I don't know how this will work out, but I trust you, something changes inside you. The anxiety that once consumed you begins to dissolve. Surrender produces stillness, and in stillness, you hear the voice of direction. God cannot redirect what you refuse to release. One of the most powerful truths about surrender is that it allows God to rewrite your story without erasing your identity. Many people fear surrender because they believe it means losing themselves. But God does not erase you, He refines you. He takes the fragments of your brokenness and arranges them into a masterpiece. The parts of your life that you thought were ruined can become the very places where His glory is revealed. When you surrender your plans, you make room for His promises. When you release your timing, you make space for His perfect will. Surrender also requires trust in God's character. You cannot release control to someone you do not trust. That is why your understanding of who God is determines how easily you can surrender to Him. If you see God as harsh or distant, surrender will feel like punishment. But if you see Him as a loving Father who only wants the best for you, surrender becomes peace. You realize that He is not taking something from you. He is preparing something for you. He is not removing control to restrict you. He is guiding you to protect you. There are times when surrender feels painful because it requires detachment from what you thought life would look like. You may have to let go of relationships, ambitions, or dreams that once defined you. But even in those moments, surrender is not loss. It is transition. It is God exchanging your temporary desires for eternal purpose. Every time you surrender, you trade confusion for clarity, exhaustion for renewal, and limitation for divine direction. When you resist surrender, you live in tension. You keep asking, why isn't this working? When God is asking, why won't you trust me? True peace is not found in having every answer. It is found in trusting the one who does. Surrender teaches you to rest not because life is easy, but because you believe God is faithful. You learn to walk with open hands, understanding that what He removes, He replaces with something better. Think of surrender as a reset button for the soul. It allows you to stop trying to make life fit your blueprint and instead align with God's design. When you surrender, your heart becomes teachable again. You start to hear whispers of new direction, ideas, opportunities, and insights you missed while trying to control everything. You begin to see that what once felt like the end was simply the beginning of a better plan. Surrender is the foundation of restoration. You cannot be restored while still clinging to what broke you. You cannot be redirected while resisting the new path God is showing you. The moment you surrender, you open the door for God to work. He replaces fear with faith, shame with strength, and confusion with clarity. The beauty of surrender is that it turns your weakness into a witness. You become living proof that peace does not come from control. It comes from trust. When you stop fighting against the flow of divine purpose and start cooperating with it, life becomes lighter. The things that used to overwhelm you lose their power. You stop measuring your worth by your ability to control outcomes and start finding identity in God's unchanging love. Surrender is not the end of your story. It is where your true story begins. It is the sacred act of saying, God, I may not understand everything, but I choose to trust that your way is higher, your plan is wiser, and your timing is perfect. And when you live from that posture, restoration is not a possibility. It becomes a promise. Restoration does not begin when your circumstances change. It begins when your perception does. Many people pray for God to change their situation, but few allow Him to change their mindset. Yet transformation always begins within. How you see your pain determines how you progress through it. When you view every difficulty as a dead end, you lose hope. But when you learn to see it as divine development, you awaken to purpose. The difference between despair and direction is perspective. God can take the same event that once broke you and use it to build you, but only after you shift the way you see it. Most people define restoration as returning to what was lost. But divine restoration goes beyond that. It redefines what was lost. It does not simply give back what you had, it makes you into someone capable of handling more than before. When you stop seeing loss as punishment and start seeing it as preparation, you position yourself for growth. Sometimes God removes things not to hurt you, but to make room for what is greater. But you can only perceive that truth when you stop blaming yourself and begin trusting His plan. Restoration starts when you stop saying, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what is this teaching me? Pain has a way of distorting your vision. When you are hurt, you see everything through the lens of brokenness. You interpret silence as rejection, delay as denial, and correction as condemnation. That is why perspective is so critical to restoration. God cannot heal what you keep misinterpreting. If you keep calling every pruning a punishment, you will resist the very process that is designed to make you fruitful. Every season of loss carries a message of renewal, but you must tune your heart to hear it. The moment your perspective changes, your healing accelerates. Think of your life as a mosaic. From up close, the broken pieces look random and painful. But when you step back, you begin to see the pattern, the beauty that only makes sense from a higher view. That is how God works. You may not understand why certain things happened, why people left, or why doors closed. But when you stop fixating on the fragments, you begin to recognize divine order. Restoration happens when you allow God to reveal the masterpiece hidden in the mess. When you shift your perspective, you also shift your energy. Instead of replaying the past, you begin to reframe it. You start saying, that season taught me resilience. That failure taught me faith. That disappointment taught me discipline. The moment you reinterpret your pain, it loses power over you. What once felt like a wound becomes wisdom. Restoration is not about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. Blaming yourself blocks this process because blame keeps you tied to the past. As long as you keep saying, I should have known better, you remain in the same emotional space where the pain occurred. But when you say, now I understand better, you reclaim authority over your narrative. God uses understanding as the bridge between heartbreak and healing. Once you begin to see your experience through His eyes, you realize that what felt like an ending was actually an invitation to evolve. Restoration through perspective also teaches gratitude. Gratitude shifts focus from what you lost to what you've learned. It opens your eyes to blessings that pain once blinded you to. Sometimes what you thought was destruction was actually protection. Sometimes the people who left were never meant to stay, because their season in your life was temporary. Gratitude turns confusion into clarity. It reminds you that even in your darkest valley, you were never alone. God was not punishing you. You experience full restoration. You must let go of the need to understand everything before you trust. Faith often precedes understanding. You will not always see the reason in the moment, but trust keeps you anchored until revelation comes. Perspective grows with patience. As time passes and your spirit matures, you begin to see patterns you missed before. You look back on what once broke you and realize it built strength, endurance, and empathy within you. These are treasures far greater than what you lost. Restoration is both an act of grace and an act of awareness. Grace restores what was damaged. Awareness ensures it does not get damaged again. Once your vision is healed, you start recognizing new opportunities where you once saw obstacles. You begin to interpret challenges as classrooms, not curses. God cannot restore you into ignorance. He restores you into insight. That is why your healed perspective becomes your greatest protection. When your eyes open to this truth, peace follows. You stop striving to fix every broken thing because you realize that some things were not meant to be repaired. They were meant to be replaced. You stop mourning the old because you start marveling at what is new. The moment you stop blaming yourself and start seeing with divine eyes, life feels lighter. You no longer see yourself as a victim of what happened, but as a vessel shaped by purpose. So restoration begins not when life gives back what it took, but when you begin to see what life was giving you all along: wisdom, patience, humility, and trust. Once that perspective settles into your heart, you are no longer defined by what broke you. You are defined by what God built in you through it. The change you seek outside of you must first begin within you. When your vision aligns with His truth, everything else begins to heal naturally. True restoration is when your perspective becomes so renewed that even the past loses its power to wound you. Redirection is one of the greatest signs of divine favor, though at first it rarely feels that way. When life suddenly shifts, when doors close, when relationships end, or when opportunities vanish, our first instinct is to think we've failed. We ask, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? But often, nothing went wrong. You simply reached the end of a chapter that was never meant to last forever. God's redirection is His way of protecting your purpose. It is not rejection, it is realignment. When you belong to Him, every detour carries design, even when it feels like disappointment. The truth is, divine redirection is not random, it is strategic. It comes when you've outgrown certain environments or when the path you are on no longer serves your growth. Sometimes, you pray for new blessings while holding on to old places. You ask God to elevate you, yet you remain attached to what is comfortable. That's when He intervenes. He removes what no longer fits, not to punish you, but to prepare you. What you call loss, heaven calls transition. Every divine redirection is evidence that God refuses to let you settle for less than what He created you for. It takes spiritual maturity to recognize that favor often comes disguised as frustration. The same moment that feels like rejection is often the moment that secures your destiny. If you had stayed where you were, you might have missed what was waiting ahead. God sees the full map of your life. You only see the road immediately in front of you. While you're crying over what closed, He's opening something better that your tears can't let you see yet. The challenge is learning to trust the delay and the detour. Faith is not proven in success. It is proven in surrender to divine direction. When God redirects you, He is not changing His mind about your destiny. He is changing your route to reach it. The plan has not been canceled, it has been upgraded. Sometimes the shortest path is not the safest path, so He takes you the long way around to strengthen your endurance. You think He's slowing you down, but He's actually securing your foundation. God would rather delay your arrival than let you collapse when you get there unprepared. Divine redirection is a mark of His love, not His anger. The people who grow the most in life are those who learn to see divine movement even in disruption. They understand that when God closes one door, it is not the end, it's an invitation to look for the next one. Every no from heaven is followed by a greater yes, but that yes requires faith to find. When you stop blaming yourself for the closed doors and start thanking God for His protection, peace replaces panic. What you once called a setback becomes a sacred setup for the next level of your assignment. The key to navigating divine redirection is flexibility. God cannot redirect what is rigid. If your plans are too fixed, you leave no space for Him to adjust them. You must learn to hold your dreams loosely enough for His hand to move freely. Sometimes, The thing you wanted was too small for who you're becoming. Other times it was never meant for you at all. Divine redirection removes temporary comfort to reveal eternal calling. It's how God prunes your path so that your purpose can bear greater fruit. It's natural to feel disoriented when things shift. You may not understand why certain people left, why certain opportunities fell apart, or why your timeline didn't unfold as expected. But that confusion is part of divine construction. God works best in uncertainty because it forces you to rely on Him. If everything made sense, you would depend on logic instead of faith. Redirection teaches dependence. It teaches you to listen, to wait, and to trust His unseen hand when visible paths fade. Over time, you will look back and realize that every detour was divine design. You will see how one door closing led you to a greater purpose, how one disappointment became the birthplace of discipline, and how one unexpected turn carried you exactly where you were meant to be. God wastes nothing. Even the interruptions are part of the instruction. His redirection is never meant to humiliate you. It's meant to elevate you. When you finally stop seeing redirection as a curse and start viewing it as confirmation of favor, your perspective changes. You no longer beg God to take you back to what was. You begin to thank Him for leading you forward into what can be. You stop asking the restoration of the old and start preparing for revelation of the new. That shift is when destiny unfolds. So when you encounter a closed door, do not despair. Bow your head, take a breath, and thank you, Lord, for leading me where I need to go, even if it's not where I planned. Because divine redirection is never random. It's the Creator's signature on the blueprint of your life. It's His way of saying, I love you too much to leave you where you are. What feels like disruption today will one day be recognized as divine choreography. Every closed door, every delayed answer, every unexpected change, it all works together as evidence that you are being guided, guarded, and grown by the one who knows exactly where you belong. And when that truth settles in your heart, peace will follow every path, even the ones you didn't plan to take. When you look at your life through the lens of divine wisdom, you begin to realize that every season, every pain, loss, delay, and redirection was never meant to destroy you but to develop you. The moments you blamed yourself were the very moments God was calling you to release control. The situations you tried to fix were never meant to be handled in your own strength. Through it all, He was not asking for perfection. He was asking for surrender. He was shaping your heart to understand that His grace is greater than your guilt, His purpose stronger than your past, and His plan wiser than your understanding. The truth is, you will never find peace by holding on to what you couldn't change. Peace begins when you let go. When you finally stop rehearsing your regrets and start trusting God's redirection, you open the door for restoration. Your pain becomes perspective. Your wounds become wisdom. What once felt like failure becomes the foundation for your future. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as rebuilt by grace, by purpose, and by divine timing. There is freedom in acknowledging that you don't have to have all the answers. You only need faith in the one who does. Life is not meant to be a continuous struggle of self-blame and self-correction. It is a journey of learning, releasing, and realigning. God doesn't want you trapped in yesterday. He wants you prepared for tomorrow. Every time you surrender, you grow. Every time you trust Him beyond your understanding, you rise. Every time you let go of guilt, you make room for grace to flow. So today, choose release. Choose peace over punishment, growth over guilt, and faith over fear. Stop blaming yourself for what you couldn't change. You were never meant to carry that weight. Hand it to God, the one who can restore what you lost and redirect what went off course. He is not finished with you. In fact, this may just be the turning point where He begins to do His greatest work in your life. Let the past teach you, but do not let it trap you. Let your pain refine you, but do not let it define you. Stand still long enough to see that the hand of God was in it all. The breaking, the waiting, the shifting, the healing. And when you finally see it, you will understand every loss had a lesson, every delay had direction, and every redirection was a divine act of love. You are not behind. You are being rebuilt for greater things. And the moment you surrender fully, restoration will no longer be a promise. It will become your reality.